Nate Silver writes the 538 blog, and he joins me now to talk about tonight's results. So Nate, obviously a great night for the president, but also a great night for you and your forecast model, which is performing pretty much perfectly right now. I think depending on which lineup of called states you look at, you're 44 for 44 or going on.
Yeah, we haven't, keeping my fingers crossed, we haven't missed one yet tonight. And part of the reason is that because we saw a late surge toward Obama at the end in the national polls as well as the state polls, that was why, for example, we had Florida shift into really a toss-up. If we're being very generous, we had Obama as like a 50.2% favorite, pretty much. But usually in American politics, people have more in common than they disagree on, and at least between different states. And so if you have a rise in the national polls or a rise in some states that may be replicated in others, we actually saw an election break toward the incumbent at the end here.
Now, one thing that was really interesting in the way this race got called tonight was that different organizations called the 270 on the basis of different states, which spoke to something that you wrote a lot about in the last several weeks, which was the depth of Barack Obama's swing state advantage and the number of possible maps he had to 270.
Well, you could see kind of at the end of the race where the Romney folks weren't quite sure where to turn, and they tried Pennsylvania, which was actually called very early in the evening.
Wisconsin, they tried Wisconsin.
That was thought to be one of the most competitive states for a while. That was also called fairly quickly. Of course, if Obama had a modest lead in the swing states and you beat your polls by a point or two, then things are going to look even better. But it really seemed like where Romney's making his margins are, he's doing well, say, in the rural South and places. And so you might have a long-term issue here for the Republican Party, which is right now their coalition may be at kind of a disadvantage in the Electoral College. It works better for the House, where it's an advantage to be in rural areas. The Senate's kind of neutral on that. But for presidential elections now, you're looking at a case where the GOP's been on something of a losing streak, really, where even their wins in 2000, 2004 were quite narrow. So we'll see.
Now, there had been a lot of this talk about could President Obama win the Electoral College and Mitt Romney win the popular vote. We did not see that tonight. In fact, it looks like President Obama actually sort of beat what the estimates would be for his popular vote advantage.
Yeah, it's going to take a while to know exactly where it will end up. The reason being is that California and Washington and Oregon do a lot of voting by mail. Those ballots can take sometimes days or even a week or two to count and to get everything certified. So we don't know. If I had to make a bet, I think Obama.
We try never to make bets around here.
Try never to make bets around here. I think Obama will probably at least equal Bush's margin of victory in 2004, which is 2.5 points, but it could wind up being 3 or 4 or 4.5. It'll take a while to kind of figure out all the math on that.
But stronger than even we'd necessarily expected, and closer to what the sort of state poll average was than the national poll average.
That's right. Although there were some polls, we should say the ABC and Washington Post had a poll that had Obama winning the popular vote by 3 points. Pew Research did as well. One thing, by the way, firms that use the better methodology here, that called people who have cell phones, that made an effort to reach out to the broader group of demographics, some of whom do vote, did better than the ones who kind of only skimmed the surface. So there are actually people I was talking about, what would happen if Romney won, despite all the polls showing Obama up in the swing states. I think you can almost ask now, some of these firms that were maybe kind of weighing the average down, and so there might be recriminations for them potentially.
And one thing that this speaks to is not just the accuracy of your model, which it definitely speaks to, but also the accuracy of the polling in this cycle.
Yeah, we should say, on the whole, the polls were quite good, and the polls are usually quite good. A number of cycles in a row now. Any one poll is often a little bit dubious, but when you average them together, they seem to do a better job of kind of calibrating where the average voter is. Some of them err toward one side or another. I do think a cynic might argue that we're making up a little bit with quantity, what we maybe lack in quality. And you did have a good night, I think, for the big kind of major news network polls, the ones who put money, like I said, into calling really everyone they can get, which is hard to do nowadays.
Like our polls, yeah.
Like the New York Times, CBS polls, right? But you really do see a differentiation now where we'll see. There are other things that happened tonight as well, where Democrats may win a couple of Senate races where they weren't necessarily favored. They may win. There were a bunch of ballot initiatives like gay marriage. Appears as though it'll pass for the first time on the ballot in a couple of states. Marijuana legalization initiatives. So you can't quite call it a landslide, but you could be looking at an election where Obama's won all the swing states except North Carolina, where Democrats have maybe gained 2 or 3 seats in the Senate, where you had a number of social reforms passed and voter initiatives, and all of a sudden the GOP did hold the House, and that was called by many networks quite early in the night. But apart from that, it was a pretty decisive win, I think, for President Obama and for Democrats more broadly.
Thanks so much, Nate.
Thank you.